if you spend a year working on something and you've already got a full-time job, it hurts. Like the process of writing an entire book, editing it, rewriting it, editing, rewriting, then there's just a ton of work. So it is a really, really big deal to hit anywhere in the top half of the bestseller list for a book. And yesterday, I felt the weight of all of that year of work and the risk that I put into it to completely develop a whole new career at this point in my life. So the self-help books, now 3 of them essentially, if you count How to Fail and Win Bigly and Now Lose Your Thing, they form a trilogy, a body of work, which effectively legitimized my entire career change. So I want to tell you about this moment. So I'm ready to fly home, and I'm nothing but exhausted. Right? I'm nothing but exhausted. And I get this good news, and it felt amazing. It felt amazing. It was a full body, every atom in my body was vibrating in the right direction. And I walked in my house. Christina was there. And Christina told me that she had just finished the book herself. She was waiting for the audio version, so she just had consumed it and had just finished. And then she told me that it was one of the best books she'd ever read or listened to. And I got to tell you, hearing it from Christina was as good as the first time I heard I made it to the number 1 of the list. It was just one of the best days of my whole life. Let me tell you about the best day of my life. It goes like this. My first book, that was called The Dilbert Principles, back in, late 90s. I had never written a book before, and I was asked to write a book, and so I wrote one. It was called The Dilbert Principle, and it hit the charts, and it just screamed. I mean, it just went running up the bestseller list, and it became very quickly the number 2 book. The number 1 book, in the nonfiction side, the number 1 book was Dennis Rodman's book, As Bad as I Want to Be, his little biography, biography/autobiography. And it just sat there for a while, and it looked like I would never get to number 1 because his was so dominant. It was just sitting there at number 1. And one day I got a call from my publisher, and my publisher who finds out about the bestseller list before the public does. And the publisher called to tell me that when the next list dropped, I would be the number 1 author on the New York Times list. And I happened to be alone when I got that call. So I was in a relationship, but I was, wasn't with anybody. I was just home. And I got that call, and I found out that I would be the number 1 author on the New York Times list. And I just cried. Because it was just one of the best days of my life. Just one of the best days of my life. Now, it's very difficult to get another number 1 book. But because that one was doing so well, my publisher said, "Can you hurry and put together some stuff that maybe you've got ready or whatever?" And I didn't think I could do it, but I worked very quickly and put together a fairly rapid follow-up book called Dogbert's Top Secret Management Handbook. And for a while, my 2 books were number 1 and number 2 on the bestseller list. And that was a really good feeling to have the number 1 and number 2 book. Now, because the nature of publishing is people who have big hits like that almost never have another big hit. So I was told by my publisher at the time what to expect, that each book that came after that would sell about half as much as the one before. Sort of a standard rule for nonfiction. It's not true with fiction. With fiction, you could just sell as many as you want. But with nonfiction, if you have a big hit right off the bat, your subsequent books tend to sell half as much, then the next one's half as much as that, until they're not viable anymore. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. So I got a big book deal because the first one did so well, and just almost like magic, every book followed that exact formula. Every one was half as much as the one before, until you got to the point where writing books didn't make as much sense. So that was my Dilberty office jokes kind of life. And as you know, in 2013, I pivoted to writing some books that were more in the self-help category, and then a little bit on politics. So I wrote How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big in 2013, and that became I think it may have touched the bestseller list for a little bit, but didn't really set the world on fire in terms of the bestseller list. It is by many considered to be the best self-help book out there. And then I wrote Win Bigly, which was more about persuasion in the political sense. And then I just published Loserthink, which is more about how to think productively and avoid the little traps that are easy to fall into. And because this one hit the bestseller list, I got to feel a little bit of that feeling that I felt in the late 90s, that one day that was the best day of my life, and that was yesterday. I have to tell you that if you spend a year working on something and you've already got a full-time job, it hurts. Like the process of writing an entire book, editing it, rewriting it, editing, rewriting, then there's just a ton of work around the title, the blurbs, the acknowledgments, there's the advertising, the marketing, the re-editing, the contracts. There's an immense amount of work that goes into producing a book. And then you go on a book tour. The book tour, as every author will tell you, is just painful. It's just painful. Now, there are parts of it which are fun. I like the people. I loved going on the Greg Gutfeld show. I loved a lot of the interviews, meeting the people. You know, I got to meet Dana Perino, got to meet, hung out with, I'd already met, but Dave Rubin, Adam Carolla, Dennis Prager yesterday. So I'm having a great time because I'm hanging out with all these cool people. But the nature of it is it's just hard because you're crossing time zones, you're getting up super early, you're going all day, you're talking, you've got to concentrate. It's just really hard, and you're away from home. So I just completed, and I was actually in the Southwest Terminal to come home from the second big leg of the tour, because it's New York first and then LA because of the media markets. And I'm in there, and my phone rings, and I almost didn't answer it because I was, waiting for my flight, and I'm in the terminal, but I see it's from my publisher, and so I took the call. And the entire team that worked on the book, from editor, publisher, publicist, etc., were on the call. And they said they just called to tell me that they just heard that Loserthink would be number 5 on the bestseller list for the very prestigious self-help category. Now, you might say to yourself, hey, being on the self-help bestseller, that's not as good as being on the all nonfiction bestseller. And you would almost be right. You would almost be right. It turns out that being on the self-help list is a place you could live for decades. You could be on that list for decades. And in fact, books that are on there right now have just been around forever. So the self-help stuff tends not to be a big hit and then nobody buys it, which is a lot of books. A lot of books are, hey, everybody buys it, and then they forget about it and move on to the next book. But with, like Stephen Covey's, or is it Stephen? Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, that's still on there. How old is that book? Decades old? So it is a really, really big deal to hit anywhere in the top half of the bestseller list for a book. And yesterday, I felt the weight of all of that year of work and the risk that I put into it to completely develop a whole new career at this point in my life. So the self-help books, now 3 of them essentially, if you count How to Fail and Win Bigly and Now Lose Your Thing, they form a trilogy, a body of work, which effectively legitimized my entire career change. So I want to tell you about this moment. So I'm ready to fly home, and I'm nothing but exhausted. Right? I'm nothing but exhausted, and I get this good news, and it felt amazing. It felt amazing. It was a full body, every atom in my body was vibrating in the right direction. Suddenly, the incredible stress of the last few weeks, and it's really stressful to do all this, live TV stuff, just evaporated. And I got on the plane. It was just like a very short flight home. And I walked in my house. Christina was there. And Christina told me that she had just finished the book herself. She was waiting for the audio version, so she just had consumed it and it just finished. And then she told me that it was one of the best books she'd ever read or listened to. And I got to tell you, hearing it from Christina was as good as the first time I heard I made it to the number 1 of the list. It was just one of the best days of my whole life. One of the best days of my life. And I'm still sort of riding it. Now, making it on the bestseller list doesn't mean you'll be there next week. But the beauty of making it onto the list is that you're forever that person. You only have to hit the list once, and then you're a best-selling author. You're a New York Times best-selling author. When the paperback version comes out, whenever that comes out someday in the future, years from now, that will say New York Times best-selling author. So I got to tell you, I couldn't be much happier right now. I couldn't be much happier. And I also spend some time. I know how this sounds, but if you're an author, you understand you have to do this. So forgive me for how this sounds, but understand it's part of my job. I read the reviews on Amazon. Now, I tend to ignore the 1-star reviews because all of my books get at least a few. The 1-star reviews are almost always from somebody who didn't read it. There are 2 categories. Just trolls who didn't read it. And then my favorite category of bad review is it's always a guy. It's always a guy. It's a guy who wants to tell the world that he's much smarter than my book. It doesn't matter which book it is. Every one of them has had this guy. It's the guy who comes in and said, I read that whole book and didn't learn anything because I already know everything. Or words to that effect. And I always laugh because that guy always shows up. There's always that guy. But if you read the 5-star reviews, and it's overwhelmingly 5-star reviews, you can see that people are benefiting from the book. They're getting something out of it. And that, I got to say, is the payoff. The payoff is that people are reading it and rereading it. In fact, Christina said that she's only consumed 1 other book in her life that she wanted to immediately reread. and it was this one. And she swears it's not because I'm the author, but that it's that good. Well, it doesn't get much better than this, I got to tell you. This is, if you're ever going to have, and I feel, honestly, I feel a little bit guilty that I can't share it. I can't really, I wish you could feel the way I feel right now, because you can't feel much better. Like right now, I'm having just one of the best times of my life. It just doesn't get any better than this. So I hope you can get a little bit of a contact high from just hearing about it. Should it go to number one on that list, we're going to have another little celebration here. But I got to tell you, when you work that hard on something and then it pays off, it's a damn good feeling. You're immortal now. I am, in more ways than one. I've said before that my grand plan, I always have a small plan and then a big plan. The big plan is that I've created enough content that somebody can build the first artificial person robot based on me, because I've explicitly approved that. Here I'm doing it again in public. I give complete and unrestricted approval for AI experimenters or even manufacturers to, after my death, this is the key part, it has to be after my death, no copyright restrictions. You may copy my entire personality and being and put it into your test robot, because there's so much content that I've created in the public domain. You could do that easily. And I'd like to go first, because who would be easier? It would be completely easy, because of all the materials out there already.